What is up, everyone? I am TST's the Mudman, and it's time to figure out what we are going to be playing this weekend ranked in Gods Unchained. So we're on GUDecks.com looking at God popularity at Mythic rank over the last 7 days, and as you can see, Deception is still on top, but then Death has risen up the ranks to the second most popular God, followed by Magic, and then Nature, War, and Light pulling up the rear. When you run into Deception this weekend, it will most likely be Aggro Deception. They are a very powerful god, very hard to interact with their creatures, and they're able to buff them up very quickly and do lots of damage. Death is almost always Anubian Death, however, Zombie Death has been making quite the resurgence in this past week. Um, Zombie Death is definitely nowhere near as good as Anubian Death or Over the Line Death or even Board Wipe Death, but people are playing zombies, so keep that in mind. Magic is almost always control magic. It's probably like the most common control archetype in the meta right now. Nature is in a pretty weird spot. It used to always be aggro nature, then all the aggro tools were nerfed. Value nature doesn't really fit great into the meta right now. Some people are experimenting with new aggressive nature decks, but realistically, you probably won't see a ton of nature, and if you do, it likely won't be very good. War is usually Relic War, however, some people have been experimenting with creature-oriented war decks, but Relic War is the war deck to go with for sure. And then Light, similar to Nature, used to have a very strong aggro archetype, but that has been nerfed. Control Light is still alive and well, but not the most common Light archetype since the deck is fairly expensive. I imagine Light will be very similar to Nature. If you happen to run into it, it'll probably be Control Light or just a very weak aggressive Light deck that you should have no problem with beating. But now that we've done this brief overview of the meta, let's look at some decks you might want to play this weekend. Alright, let's start things off with Aggro Deception. This Aggro Deception list made by 3 question marks was one of many decks to go 17 out of 18 at this past weekend ranked event. And this Deception list is very similar to all the other Deception lists we've covered in the past. They play early game creatures, most of which are hidden. Then they play some creature buff cards. Let's see, where's some more? Some creature buff cards. They hide their own creatures with Orpheo's Distraction or hide opposing front lines to go face. And the only real card of note in this deck that's different from other decks is the inclusion of Pietro. Pietro is a Mortal Judgment legendary. It's a 4-mana 1/1, so incredibly weak, initially. But you summon 2 random 1-mana war creatures, and then you hide your entire board. Hiding your entire board is very, very beneficial. Obviously you want to hide as many creatures as possible to make it so your opponent can't interact with them. But sometimes you're in situations where you have to hide an opposing front line, and then that leaves your creatures, vulnerable to attack. In most decks, we always have Assassin's Aim, so you can cheat your opponent's creature and then Assassin's Aim one of yours. But for 5 mana and a pip or 6 mana, you can do that same thing with Pietro and refill your board for even more damage. So Aggro Deception has been very powerful for the past couple of weeks. However, sometimes, you do get hit by like a Shape Blast or something along those lines, and Pietro is really good for refilling your board and hiding, relatively large creatures like Fermentari Instigator. So if you're a fan of the aggressive Deception decks, then a list like this could be great for this weekend ranked event. Alright, now let's move on to Death. This is an over-the-line Death deck made by Clay. And in a nutshell, the over-the-line strategy is to get a whole bunch of stats on the board at one time, and then play over the line to have all of those stats go face to do big damage to your opponent. The over-the-line archetype has been a fringe archetype for the past couple of weeks, but in the most recent balance patch, they received a new tool in Surus, Arbiter of the Trial. This card used to have some sort of echo effect. Now it is a 6-mana 5/5 that its mana is reduced by 1 for each point below 10 health you're at, and then its roar effect sets your health to 10. And seeing as you're trying to play a whole bunch of stats, ideally for free, so you can play over the line, this card fits in perfectly. It's, very similar to Thanatar, a essentially 0-mana 4/4 that you're going to be playing alongside your over the line. But one thing that Surus does that's very important for this deck is setting your health total to 10. If you've played the over the line archetype, you've probably found yourself in situations where if you could play Necronomics to play either your first or second over the line, you'd be able to win. However, you don't have enough health to play Necronomics. Well, if you're in one of those situations, that means your Surus costs 0, and it sets you up to be able to play that aforementioned Necronomics for big damage. However, there are more ways to get lots of stats on the board than just Surus and Thanatar. We also have 2 copies of Possessed Acolyte, as well as 2 copies of Rockdrake Egg, which make 6/6s or 6/5s if you meet their afterlife requirements. And then you can get those creatures, or get those effects again through your Canopic Hoarder. So essentially speaking, when you do your kill turn, you'll be playing Candidate Quarter, getting two 6/6s or 6/5s or a combination of both, and then playing 1 to 2 Thanatars, maybe a Surus, and then Necronomics into over the line to do tons and tons of damage. Besides that, we have our standard death staples. We have Siren of the Graves to put your opponent to sleep forever, Sulfuric Rain to mill your opponent and draw all of your different combo pieces. Blight Bombs because they're good, Flesh Binds to sustain you. There's also like a cool little synergy with Flesh Bind and Surus. If you're close to dying, you can play Surus and then Flesh Bind, and you get to 15. That's half your health back, so that's always nice. But the real question with over-the-line death is it better than Anubians? And the answer is probably not, so let's talk about Anubians. Here is an Anubian death deck. We're not going to go over it too much, so we talk about it every single week. It's definitely easier to play than any other death deck, and will probably perform better. So if you are interested in playing death, you might want to just bite the bullet and keep going with the Anubians. But if you're looking for fun and cool, then the over-the-line death could be a great choice for you. Alright, next up we have School Teacher OTK. This list was made by Jazzes. And one thing that's very interesting about this list that's unique to most other combo decks or OTK decks is there actually are two separate routes to victory. So let's go over the primary win condition first. As you may have guessed by the curve of this deck having 22 cards at 1 mana and 8 cards at 2, this combo relies heavily on Lost in the Depths. So ideally you play Lost in the Depths on turn 1 or 2. You remove all of the 1 mana cards from your deck, leaving you with just your combo. Your combo, of course, being Clone, School Teacher, Warped Engineer, Parthian Guardian, and then 2 more damage. So the idea is you play your Warped Engineers on your School Teachers, making them cost 0. Then you play your Clones to get 4 copies of 0 mana School Teachers. You play all 4 School Teachers, followed by Parthian Guardian, which deals 28 damage altogether, and then you deal the final 2 damage with your Vow of Champions. And altogether, this combo costs 4 mana to set up, and then 4 mana the turn after, so this combo can be done very, very quickly if you hit the high roll. However, anyone who's played these Lost in the Depths decks has definitely been in situations where they don't draw their Lost in the Depths. However, Jazzes has accounted for this with his alternate win condition or substitute teacher combo. As you can see, he has packed all of the available 1 mana 1/1s that make 2 bodies, Card Sharks, the Bodyguard, Nimble Pixie, all that type of stuff. And since we have so much, card draw in this deck with Dimension Doors and Levitates and Seeing Stones, blah, 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 as well as your Clear Mind God Power to curate your draws, it's not unrealistic to draw, 1 School Teacher and a Clone, and then just fill up your board with 2 School Teachers, Nimble Pixie and Card Shark for 18 damage, and then just do it again at some other point with your, Bodyguards and your Parthian Guardians. So if you do whiff on your Lost in the Depths, you have the alternate win condition of just playing School Teacher twice, essentially, and doing 18 damage twice and beating your opponent. Jazzes here has played 15 games with a 73% win rate, but the most important part is every single game he has won has been on turn 5. So if you're looking to finish your weekend games quickly, if you're looking to deal 30 damage all at once, then a School Teacher deck like this could be a very fun choice for you this weekend. Alright, now we have Relic War. This Relic War list was made by Caution Fun, and it is fairly similar to the Relic War list we've talked about in the past, but with 2 major differences. This list includes 2 copies of Sharpen, which is a 2 mana spell that gives a creature as well as your relic plus 3 attack, so it's 2 mana for 6 damage. It's also very important or very key for destroying big front lines like Guild Enforcer. If you pair a Sharpen with one of your 3 attack creatures like Wolf Cult Vanguard or Orcish Elite, you can destroy an opposing Guild Enforcer. You can also pair it with your Blade of Sticks to give it 6 attack, also making it so you can destroy a Guild Enforcer without having to waste one of your coveted Whetstones or Unrestrained Powers. The other important thing to note is this deck uses both Valka's Presence and Slayer God Power. However, it uses Valka's Presence far more often than Slayer. You pretty much pick Valka's Presence in every single matchup besides Death, because most of the time Death is Anubian Death, and you don't want to give them creatures to trade into. But Valka's Presence is generally, far superior than Slayer. It's great for just, picking up favors so that you can get the front lines and relic removal from the Sanctum. It also pairs very nicely with that aforementioned Sharpen for some surprise damage or some, surprise trading. And of course, it makes it so you always have a target for Out of Its Misery, so you can draw through your deck and, get those big creatures for big tempo plays. All in all, this is, very similar to those other war lists, but it's capable of doing just a little bit more damage, and that Valka's Presence God Power gives it some like extra board presence, which can be very helpful. So if you're a fan of the big Relic War decks, then this could be a great list for this weekend. Alright, next up we have Control Light. This list was made by JRock96, and it is a lot like the Control Light list we've been featuring for the past couple of weeks. We have all of the anti-creature cards and ordery cards, as well as big value stuff. The reason I picked J-Rock's list over other people's list is he has all of the tech cards in his deck, which means he has more creatures than average. He also has 2 copies of Encumbered Looter for more draw. The reason I am liking these heavier creature-oriented Control Light lists is with Aggro Light being gone and Aggressive Nature being gone, there are less decks, contesting the board early on. So if you can play, even relatively weak creatures like Gleam Weavers and Iron-Tooth Goblins in the early game, you might be able to just chip your opponent down faster and, win the game earlier. But as we have learned from the past couple of weeks, Light is very good at, warding off creature-oriented decks, and it is impossible to control them because they can outvalue any deck with their Radiant Embalmer plus Inescapable Duty, loop. So if you're a fan of long, grindy games and you want to play Demogorgon way more than just twice, then a list like this could be perfect for your weekend. Alright, and the last god to discuss is Nature. This is a tempo Nature list made by Mighty Uncle, and in my opinion, Nature is currently the weakest god out there, so you might not want to actually play Nature, but I'm a big fan of Mighty Uncle's deck. This is very different than the Aggressive Nature decks that we have been accustomed to. As I'm sure everyone knows, Aggressive Nature has lost Penumbra Howler and Sing Song Satyr, so they can no longer employ the play early game creatures and then snowball strategy. And this deck relies much more on recapturing tempo, and Mighty Uncle has done that by including lots of blitz creatures. Of course, we have Nature staple Underbrush Boar. This card's always in every Nature deck, but we also have Dagon, as well as 2 copies of Warrior of Paradise, and Lupine Wayfarer, and also Vicious Manticore, all blitz creatures capable of, removing an opponent's creature while creating creature for yourself to recapture tempo. We also have 2 copies of Moonlight Charm, which pairs really nicely with all of these blitz creatures. If you're unaware, this is a 3-mana relic, and each turn you can give one of your creatures +2/+2 and remove a durability from this relic. So if you can, play a Moonlight Charm on turn 3, plop down a Warrior of Paradise, buff it into a 5/5, take a big value trade, and buff up one of your creatures to attack. That is quite the powerful tempo swing turn. And then one other thing that I'd like to note is the way that Mighty Uncle has teched against specifically Aggro War. You can see he only has 1 copy of naturally occurring relic removal in his deck in Chiron, which is not particularly good against big Relic War. However, generally Relic War is weaker to front lines than relic removal because they have 4 to 6 relics, and 2 Briars isn't going to kill 6 relics. But front lines do the job, so we have 2 copies of Guild Enforcer in here to get in the way of all those big relics. And then Chiron not only buffs your Marshwalkers and Beetles, it also destroys pesky Necroceptors and Skull Scepters. So, very heads-up tech cards for this deck. And although I don't think Nature is the best god out there, I am a big fan of this list, so maybe after you finish your weekend ranked run, you might want to start up a second run with a Nature deck like this and see how it goes. Alright, so it is conclusion time. We've clicked through all the tabs, we've scoured GU decks for all archetype information. What deck should you play this weekend ranked in Gods Unchained? Well, the answer is probably Aggro Deception. It's been arguably the best deck for the past couple of weeks. 2 different people went 17 out of 18 with it last week. They're just able to make such big creatures so quickly, and their cards are so hard to interact with. But whatever deck you go with, try to have fun, tell us how you did in the TST Discord, and have a wonderful day. Hey you! Did you know that subscribing to the TST YouTube channel will increase your win rate by 6.9%? So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications. And while you're at it, equip Scythe of the Harvest and attack the like button directly in the face. Bye-bye!